engagement so that more and more people try and understand major public issues of our time, participate, express their opinions on it, put pressure on the government in order to see that the kind of decisions taken by the government, public policies, laws, etc., are framed in public interest rather than in the commercial interest of a few corporations, etc. If we can achieve that, that would be a real revolution in the country. And if this movement has helped to start that process, this movement will be remembered for a very long time in the history of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bhushan. Before I open up to questions for the time that we have remaining, I'd like, if I might, to just offer a few comments and then we can proceed directly to questions. I do think, having followed it in the press, that the movement has been an extraordinary one, and entirely a non-violent one as well. Itself a remarkable fact. The things that strike me about it, so I'm not remotely interested in the kinds of critiques that have been made of it as being, somehow anti-political. There is something to be said about that which I should return to, or being non-representative. In fact, I think it's one of the more representative movements of recent years. But what I'd like to ask about that representation is the following. The people who criticize the movement for not being representative enough, of course, are, to my mind, disingenuous, because they are talking about a political arena in India where national mobilization has become practically impossible, where politics seems to have been devolved down to the level of states and districts, where there are any number of political parties which represent quite small, often, constitutions or factions. To have a national movement in such circumstances seems in itself a remarkable phenomenon. And that, I think, the agitation over the anti-corruption, the agitation of the anti-corruption movement seems to have achieved. What interests me about it is it possible perhaps to say that such a form of national mobilization is now only possible on single issues? Is it possible to think about national mobilization in a political arena which is so fragmented and so factionalized as only occurring in these temporary or single issue debates? That strikes me as being in itself an interesting subject. The other thing, of course, which you raised is, and which links this movement to the global movements which you also mentioned, like the Occupy Wall Street ones, is that it seems that there is such a great disenchantment with the political class as a whole that politics now seems to arise, genuine politics, in its positive sense, from outside the political arena, from outside the institutions of the political class. That too is something quite remarkable. It's an achievement which is, I believe, an achievement rather than a demerit. And it goes to what you were saying about direct democracy as well. The fact that something seems to occur or emerge from outside the institutions of the accepted political class. And it is that emergence from outside, of course, which is declaimed or condemned as being anti-political. I think rather than anti-political, it shows you the strength of popular politics in a country like India. Corruption, finally, as a problem to deal with. It's one of those curious problems, isn't it? Because everyone acknowledges it. So it's very difficult to have pro and contra, because no one's going to actually claim to be for corruption. And is it possible to say that one of the implications of that is that one of the implications of that kind of subject, that kind of issue, is it makes conflict internecine, it internalizes conflict. So in other words, it then gets to be about not only one's own possible potential of past corruption, but also about accusations of corruption that are leveled at all kinds of people within a political party or faction or movement or group, that it has this peculiar tendency to internalize conflict, precisely because there's as it were, there is no one who will claim the side of corruption or for corruption. I wonder if you might say a few words about those issues.
So far as the scope and the range of this movement and its whether what kind of sections of society it involved, and why whether only a single issue movement can have that kind of range and breadth. I agree that one of the reasons why people from all walks of life, all kinds of political backgrounds also got involved in this movement. You saw people from the right wing, extreme right wing, almost communal, semi-fascist kind of forces get involved in this movement. You also saw people from the left who got involved. So, yeah, one of the reasons was, as you said, that corruption is an issue which obviously everybody is exercised about, and this seemed to be a proposal, the Jan Lokpal bill, or a solution being pushed, because this movement was pushing for a particular solution, which appeared to be perfectly in order. Now, whether you can achieve that same amount of mobilization, cutting across all sections on other issues or on a entire ideology, probably not. But you can, if we see this kind of public engagement of large masses of people in public issues. As you said, so far most people had sort of dropped out of not just politics but also trying to understand. They had started feeling, well, I mean, these people will decide whatever, what can we do about it, the people who are elected. And that is why those people had become so arrogant. When they say that this movement is anti-political, they kept saying, hey, look, laws are made in parliament, we have to make the laws. Why are you people telling us what kind of law we should make? I mean, they felt that the job of the people is over once they cast their vote and elect, and thereafter it's only the job of these elected people to decide what is to be done. This movement tried to change that, and that's what I'm saying, that if we can succeed in building on that, that is getting the people to again re-engage with public issues, then perhaps a consensus can also be built on many other public issues. For example, land acquisition, SEZ Act, nuclear energy. On a lot of these issues, you can achieve the same kind of political consensus across the board, but maybe not on many other issues. You may not be able to, which are more contentious, controversial issues, where different people would have different views. So,
in the little time that we have, yes, sir.
You mentioned the land acquisition bill. Do you think that what's going through Parliament, I think there is a bill.
Yes, there is.
Does that bill, in your opinion, move us forward on this issue, or is it?
Maybe it does move us forward a little bit, but certainly not enough, by no means enough. You see, in the Land Acquisition Act, that's another very, very big issue facing the country today, and that's actually giving rise to these million mutinies across the country today. Land acquisition is perhaps the most serious problem in the country in a certain sense. Now, we have been saying that it needs 4 or 5 changes. First, that no land acquisition can be permitted for private corporations. Now this is really the heart of the problem, because today land acquisition is largely for private corporations, whether it is for just real estate development, whether it is for mining or setting up industries or whatever. The government is unwilling to make that change. To my mind, there is no reason why government should compulsorily be allowed to acquire land for the purpose of giving it to a for-profit private corporation, because that cannot be an important enough public purpose for which you need to compulsorily acquire somebody's land. For that, let them buy it if they can, if it is within their within the land laws, etc. Second is that if you acquire land of those persons who are dependent for their livelihood on that land, you have to give them land for land. You cannot give them just monetary compensation. Thirdly, some independent authority must be created to do an entire cost benefit analysis of the project of the purpose for which that land is being acquired, in order to see whether that project is really in public interest or not, as opposed to merely being a public purpose. See, every dam is a public purpose, but every dam need not be in public interest if its costs are much more than the benefits. So some neutral authority must do that cost benefit analysis. Then we are saying something very fundamental, that no land acquisition must be permitted without the consent of the Gram Sabha. That is, if it is a land of a village, at least the majority of the adults in that village must consent to the acquisition of that land. But all this is not being done in the government's bill. There are some tinkering about the compensation being increased and so on, but nothing radical enough.
Well, I am very, very sorry to say this. We have to vacate this room at 5, which is now. However, might I ask those of you who want to proceed with us to attempt to occupy, since the occupations are all the to occupy the junior common room in that rather ugly building next door. So those who want to proceed and have a more informal discussion with Mr. Bhushan, please follow us.
Yeah, whoever has any questions can come.
And those who don't, needn't. Thank you very much again.